What if the worst betrayal of your life happened in front of 300 guests, but it led to the most unexpected second chance you never saw coming? Emma Rodriguez thought she had everything figured out at 26. She managed the downtown branch of Henderson Financial, drove a reliable Honda Civic, and lived in a cozy apartment with her golden retriever, Max. Her life wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, predictable, and exactly what she'd worked so hard to build after growing up with nothing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Every morning, Emma would arrive at the office by 7:30, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, wearing one of her 5 professional blazers that she rotated throughout the week. Her colleagues respected her work ethic, her clients trusted her financial advice, and her boss had been hinting at a promotion for months. Emma had carved out a comfortable existence through sheer determination and careful planning. Then Ryan Matthews walked into her life like a hurricane in an expensive suit. He was 31, a successful marketing executive with piercing blue eyes and a smile that could charm anyone into saying yes. Ryan drove a sleek black BMW, wore watches that cost more than Emma's monthly rent, and had this confidence that made everyone in a room turn to look at him. Their first meeting happened on a rainy Thursday, when Ryan needed help restructuring his investment portfolio. Emma remembered how he'd leaned back in the chair across from her desk, studying her with an intensity that made her cheeks flush. Most clients barely looked up from their phones during consultations, but Ryan hung on every word she said about market trends and retirement planning. After their meeting, Ryan lingered by her desk, asking about her weekend plans and complimenting her insights on tech stocks. When he asked her to dinner that Friday, Emma felt like she was living in someone else's life. Men like Ryan didn't usually notice women like her. She was practical, hard-working, ordinary. He was magnetic, successful, the kind of man who dated models and socialites. But Ryan seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, her dreams, her quiet ambitions. During their first dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, he listened intently as she talked about her goal of opening her own financial consulting firm someday. He asked thoughtful questions about her childhood, her family, her passion for helping people secure their futures. For 6 months, Ryan made Emma feel like the most fascinating woman in the world. He'd send flowers to her office for no reason, surprise her with weekend trips to wine country, and introduce her to his friends as his brilliant girlfriend who was going to revolutionize personal finance. Emma found herself buying designer dresses she couldn't afford, getting highlights at expensive salons, trying to match the lifestyle of someone who earned 3 times her salary. Ryan talked constantly about their future together. He described the house they'd buy in the suburbs, complete with a large backyard for Max, and a home office where Emma could run her consulting business. He painted pictures of their wedding day, their children, their retirement years spent traveling the world. Emma absorbed every word, building her entire future around his promises. When Ryan proposed on New Year's Eve at the city's most exclusive rooftop restaurant, Emma cried tears of pure joy. The ring was stunning, a 2-carat diamond that caught the light from the fireworks exploding over the harbor. Every person in the restaurant applauded as Ryan got down on one knee, declaring his love in front of strangers who seemed genuinely moved by the romantic scene. Emma's mother, Patricia, flew in from Phoenix for the engagement party Ryan insisted on hosting at his downtown loft. Patricia had raised Emma alone after her father abandoned them when Emma was 8, working double shifts as a nurse to keep them afloat. She taught Emma to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. Throughout the party, Patricia watched Ryan with careful eyes, noting how he dominated conversations and seemed to perform his affection for Emma rather than simply feel it. When she tried to voice her concerns, Emma brushed them off, convinced her mother was just being overprotective. Patricia had never seen Emma this happy, this confident, this in love. Emma's best friend since college, Sarah Chen, had similar reservations. Sarah worked as a journalist and had developed a keen sense for when people weren't being entirely honest. She noticed how Ryan's stories about his work sometimes didn't quite add up, how he'd changed the subject when asked specific questions about his company, how he seemed to have an unusual amount of free time for someone in such a demanding position. But Emma was too caught up in wedding planning to pay attention to anyone's doubts. She threw herself into creating the perfect celebration, booking the grand ballroom at the Riverside Hotel, choosing elaborate floral arrangements, tasting dozens of cake flavors, and sending save-the-dates to nearly 300 guests. Ryan left most of the planning to her, claiming he was swamped with a major client project that would wrap up just before the wedding. The dress shopping experience was everything Emma had dreamed of since she was a little girl. She found the perfect gown at an exclusive bridal boutique, a stunning off-the-shoulder creation with intricate beadwork and a cathedral train. When she stepped out of the fitting room, even the usually stoic sales consultant gasped. Emma felt like a fairy tale princess, exactly the way every bride should feel. 2 months before the wedding, Emma began noticing subtle changes in Ryan's behavior. Their nightly phone calls became shorter and more distracted. He'd cancel dinner plans at the last minute, claiming urgent work emergencies. When she'd try to discuss final wedding details, he'd seem irritated, telling her to handle whatever needed handling because he trusted her judgment completely. Emma told herself this was normal pre-wedding stress. Everyone said planning a wedding could strain even the strongest relationships. Ryan was probably just overwhelmed with work and nervous about such a big life change. She doubled down on being the perfect, understanding fiancé, taking care of every wedding detail so he wouldn't have to worry about anything. Sarah grew increasingly concerned as she watched Emma make excuses for Ryan's growing distance. During their weekly coffee dates, Emma would spend most of the time explaining away Ryan's latest cancellation or defending his need for space. Sarah could see her friend losing weight from stress, developing dark circles under her eyes from staying up late, worrying about whether everything would be perfect for their big day. The final weeks before the wedding were a blur of last-minute confirmations and rising anxiety. Emma found herself calling Ryan multiple times a day, often reaching his voicemail. When he did answer, their conversations felt stilted and formal, like they were business associates rather than lovers about to pledge their lives to each other. 3 days before the wedding, Emma decided to surprise Ryan at his office with lunch from his favorite deli. She'd been feeling disconnected from him and hoped a spontaneous romantic gesture might recapture some of their earlier magic. She dressed carefully in a blue dress he'd once complimented, bought his preferred sandwich and coffee, and drove across town to his building. The receptionist at Ryan's marketing firm looked confused when Emma asked for him. After checking her computer and making a quick phone call, the young woman informed Emma that Ryan Matthews had left the company 6 weeks ago. Emma stood in the marble lobby, holding a bag of sandwiches, trying to process this information that made no sense. When she called Ryan immediately, he answered on the first ring with an oddly cheerful tone. Emma confronted him about his job, and after a long pause, Ryan admitted he'd been laid off but hadn't wanted to worry her so close to the wedding. He claimed he'd been using the time to plan their honeymoon and handle some family business. His explanation sounded rehearsed, and Emma felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. That night, Emma lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with questions she was afraid to ask. If Ryan had been lying about his job, what else might he be hiding? She thought about all the recent changes in his behavior, all the excuses, all the times he'd seemed like a stranger wearing her fiancé's face. Sarah called the next morning, her voice tight with concern. She'd been doing some research for a story about corporate fraud and had stumbled across information about Ryan's former company. The marketing firm had been under investigation for embezzling client funds, and several employees, including Ryan, had been terminated and were potentially facing criminal charges. Emma felt her world tilting sideways as Sarah explained what she discovered. Everything she thought she knew about Ryan, about their relationship, about their future together, was built on lies. She hung up the phone and immediately called Ryan, demanding he come over to explain everything. Ryan arrived an hour later, looking haggard and defensive. Under Emma's persistent questioning, the truth finally came out. He'd been fired for stealing from client accounts, he was facing potential jail time, and he'd been using their relationship as a cover while he tried to figure out how to disappear. The house he'd promised, the future he'd painted, even some of the expensive gifts he'd given her had been purchased with stolen money. Emma listened in stunned silence as the man she'd planned to marry revealed himself to be someone she'd never really known at all. When she asked about the wedding, about their guests who would be arriving tomorrow, Ryan shrugged and said they'd have to postpone everything. He was planning to leave town until the legal situation settled down. The callousness of his response broke something inside Emma. She'd rearranged her entire life for this man, defended him to everyone who'd expressed doubts, spent thousands of dollars she didn't have on a wedding that would never happen. And he was discussing their canceled future like it was a minor inconvenience. The morning of what should have been Emma's wedding day dawned bright and clear. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She woke up in her childhood bedroom at her mother's house, having fled there after Ryan's revelations the night before. Patricia had held her daughter while she sobbed, stroking her hair and murmuring the same comforting words she'd used when Emma was 8 and crying about her father's abandonment. Emma stared at her wedding dress hanging on the closet door, the beautiful gown that now seemed like evidence of her stupidity. How could she have been so blind? How could she have ignored every warning sign, every red flag, every moment when her instincts had whispered that something wasn't right? The worst part wasn't even the heartbreak. It was the shame. In a few hours, 300 people would arrive at the Riverside Hotel expecting to celebrate her marriage to a man who had vanished in the night like a common criminal. Her relatives had traveled from across the country, her colleagues had bought gifts, her mother had spent her savings on a mother-of-the-bride dress. Patricia tried to convince Emma to stay home, to let her and Sarah handle calling the venue and canceling everything. But Emma couldn't bear the thought of hiding while other people cleaned up her mess. She owed their guests an explanation, an apology, something other than a no-show that would leave everyone wondering what had happened. Against her mother's protests, Emma put on her wedding dress one final time. If she was going to face the worst humiliation of her life, she'd do it with dignity. She'd stand in front of everyone who'd come to celebrate with her and admit that she'd been a fool who'd fallen in love with a lie. The drive to the hotel felt like heading to her own execution. Sarah sat beside her in the passenger seat, squeezing her hand and promising that they'd get through this together. Patricia followed in her own car, her face set in grim determination to support her daughter through whatever came next. The Riverside Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into the elegant celebration Emma had spent months planning. White roses cascaded from crystal centerpieces, soft lighting created a romantic ambiance, and the string quartet she'd hired was already playing gentle classical music. Everything was perfect for a wedding that would never happen. Guests were beginning to arrive, elegant in their formal attire, carrying wrapped gifts and wearing expectant smiles. Emma watched from a side window as her college roommates, her work colleagues, Ryan's business associates, and distant relatives she hadn't seen in years gathered in the space she'd envisioned filled with joy and celebration. Emma's stomach churned as she realized she'd have to face all these people, explain that their trip had been wasted, their gifts pointless, their faith in her judgment completely misplaced. She'd have to admit that the man they'd come to see her marry was a criminal who'd been using her as cover while he planned his escape from justice. The moment of truth arrived as guests began taking their seats, expecting the ceremony to begin. Emma walked into the ballroom, her wedding dress rustling against the marble floor, her bouquet trembling in her hands. The conversations gradually died, as people noticed her entering alone, without Ryan, without the traditional wedding procession they'd been expecting. Emma made her way to the front of the room, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. The string quartet stopped playing, sensing that something was wrong. 300 faces turned toward her, expectant smiles, slowly fading into confusion and concern. Standing there in her beautiful dress, surrounded by flowers and fairy lights and all the trappings of a perfect wedding, Emma took a deep breath and prepared to deliver the most difficult speech of her life. She was about to confess to everyone she cared about that she'd been completely deceived by the man they'd come to celebrate. But just as she opened her mouth to speak, the ballroom doors opened with a dramatic flourish, and a figure stepped inside that made Emma's heart stop completely. The figure in the doorway was Marcus Thompson, and Emma's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't seen him in 4 years, not since their messy breakup, when she'd accused him of caring more about building his tech empire than building a relationship with her. Now he stood there in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his dark hair slightly longer than she remembered, those intense green eyes scanning the room before landing on her. Marcus had been Emma's college boyfriend, the brilliant computer science major who'd tutored her in statistics while she'd helped him navigate business courses. Back then, he'd been driven but broke, living on ramen noodles and big dreams about revolutionizing cloud computing. Emma had broken up with him during their senior year, frustrated by his obsession with his startup and his inability to prioritize their relationship. What she hadn't known was that 6 months after their breakup, Marcus had sold his company to a major tech corporation for $200 million. By 25, he'd launched another startup that went public, making him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. Emma had watched his rise from afar through business magazines and social media, always wondering what might have been different if she'd been more patient with his ambitions. Now Marcus walked through the ballroom with the quiet confidence of someone who owned rooms like this. Guests whispered and pointed, recognizing him from Forbes covers and tech conference keynotes. Emma stood frozen at the front of the room, still holding her bouquet, watching her ex-boyfriend approach with purpose in his stride. Marcus stopped directly in front of Emma, his eyes soft with concern despite the formal setting. He glanced around at the confused guests, then back at her face, taking in her tear-stained makeup and the defeated slump of her shoulders beneath the beautiful wedding dress. "I heard what happened," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying just enough for the front rows to hear. "Ryan's a fool, Emma. He always was." Emma blinked in surprise. She hadn't spoken to Marcus in years, had no idea how he'd even known about her wedding, let alone Ryan's betrayal. The ballroom was completely silent now, 300 people holding their breath as they witnessed this unexpected encounter. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small black velvet box. Emma's eyes widened as he dropped to one knee right there in front of everyone, opening the box to reveal a stunning emerald-cut diamond that caught the ballroom's chandelier light and threw rainbows across the floor. "Emma Rodriguez," Marcus said, his voice strong and clear enough for every person in the room to hear. "4 years ago, I was too young and too stupid to realize that building a fortune means nothing if you don't have the right person to share it with. I've thought about you every single day since you walked out of my life." The gasps from the wedding guests were audible now. Emma could see her mother's shocked face in the third row, Sarah's mouth hanging open near the back, and the confused expressions of people who'd come expecting one wedding and were witnessing something entirely different. "I know this isn't how anyone imagined this day would go," Marcus continued, never taking his eyes off Emma's face. "But sometimes life gives you a second chance when you least expect it. I'm not asking you to love me again right away. I'm asking you to marry me today, in front of all these people who came here to celebrate you. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that I'm the man you deserved 4 years ago." Emma stared down at Marcus, her mind reeling. This was impossible, surreal, like something out of a movie, rather than her actual life. 6 hours ago, she'd been preparing to marry Ryan. 2 hours ago, she'd been devastated and humiliated, ready to apologize to 300 people for wasting their time. Now her billionaire ex-boyfriend was proposing to her in the same spot where she should have been exchanging vows with a criminal. "Marcus, Emma began, then stopped. She looked out at the sea of faces watching this drama unfold. These people had traveled from across the country, bought gifts, cleared their schedules, dressed in their finest clothes. Her mother had spent her savings on this celebration. The venue was paid for, the flowers were arranged, the string quartet was ready to play. More importantly, Emma realized as she looked into Marcus's familiar green eyes, she'd never really stopped loving him. She'd convinced herself that she was over him, that Ryan was a better choice because he'd seemed more attentive, more romantic. But Ryan's romance had been performance, while Marcus's quiet intensity had always been real. "How did you even know?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus smiled, the same crooked grin she remembered from their college study sessions. "Sarah called me yesterday. She was worried about you and thought you might need a friend. When she told me what Ryan had done, I caught the first flight from San Francisco." Emma glanced back at Sarah, who was now crying openly in the back row. Her best friend had orchestrated this somehow, had reached out to the one person who might be able to salvage something beautiful from this disaster. "I know it's crazy," Marcus continued, still on one knee. "I know we have a lot to figure out, a lot to talk about. But Emma, I never stopped believing that we were meant to be together. I just needed to become the man who deserved you first." The ballroom was so quiet that Emma could hear her own heartbeat. Everyone was waiting for her answer, watching to see if this impossible moment would turn into a fairy tale or another heartbreak. Emma thought about all the reasons she should say no, all the practical concerns about marrying someone she hadn't spoken to in years. But then she thought about Ryan's lies, about how she'd spent months trying to become someone else to keep his attention. With Marcus, she'd always been herself. He'd loved her ambition, her practicality, her dreams of financial independence. He'd never asked her to change or perform or pretend to be someone she wasn't. "Yes," Emma heard herself say, the word coming out stronger and clearer than she'd expected. "Yes, Marcus, I'll marry you." The ballroom erupted in shocked applause and cheers. Marcus stood and slipped the ring onto Emma's finger, where it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. He cupped her face gently and kissed her, soft and sweet, while 300 people cheered for a love story none of them had seen coming. Pastor Williams, who'd been standing awkwardly to the side during this entire exchange, stepped forward with a bemused smile. "Well," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd, "I suppose we're still having a wedding today after all." What followed was the most unconventional wedding ceremony anyone in that ballroom had ever witnessed. Emma kept her original dress, Marcus stood beside her in his business suit, and they exchanged vows they wrote on the spot. Marcus promised to put their relationship first this time, to never let success matter more than their love. Emma promised to trust in their connection, to communicate when she was feeling neglected instead of walking away. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared felt like coming home. Emma realized that sometimes the universe had to tear apart your carefully laid plans to give you something infinitely better than what you'd settled for. The reception that followed was unlike anything anyone had expected. The same flowers Emma had chosen for Ryan now decorated Marcus and Emma's celebration. The same band played their first dance to a song Emma had never heard before, but somehow felt perfect for this moment. The same guests who'd come to witness one wedding stayed to celebrate another, most of them agreeing it was the most romantic thing they'd ever seen. During the dinner, Marcus explained to Emma's family and friends how he'd built his fortune but never forgotten the woman who challenged him to be better. He talked about the scholarship fund he'd started in Emma's name at their alma mater, the financial literacy programs he'd funded, because he remembered her passion for helping people manage their money wisely. Emma learned that Marcus had been following her career from afar, proud of her promotion to branch manager, impressed by her client testimonials, always hoping for a chance to reconnect. When Sarah had called him about Ryan's betrayal, he'd seen it as fate, giving them the second chance he'd been praying for. As the evening wound down, Emma found herself on the hotel's terrace with Marcus, looking out over the city lights. Her wedding dress billowed in the gentle breeze, and her new husband's jacket was draped over her shoulders to keep her warm. "I can't believe this is real," Emma said, turning the emerald ring on her finger. "This morning I thought my life was over." Marcus pulled her closer, his arms steady and warm around her. "This morning I was just another businessman flying to another city for another meeting. Now I'm married to the only woman I've ever really loved." Emma looked up at him, seeing not the intimidating billionaire from magazine covers, but the sweet, driven boy who'd stolen her heart in college. "What happens now?" "Your life is in San Francisco, mine is here. We figure it out together," Marcus said simply. "I can work from anywhere, and I know you've always wanted to start your own consulting firm. Maybe this is the perfect time for both of us to build something new." 3 months later, Emma opened Rodriguez Financial Consulting in a beautiful downtown office space that Marcus had surprised her with as a wedding gift. Her client base grew rapidly, built on referrals from Marcus's business network and her own reputation for honest, practical advice. Their marriage wasn't perfect. They had to relearn each other, navigate the challenges of Marcus's public profile and Emma's fierce independence. But they approached every obstacle as a team, communicating openly about their fears and expectations, never taking their second chance for granted. A year after their unexpected wedding, Emma and Marcus renewed their vows in a small ceremony on the beach where they'd had their first date in college. This time, Emma wore a simple white dress she'd chosen herself. Marcus wrote his vows weeks in advance, and only their closest family and friends were there to witness their promise to love each other through whatever came next. Emma often thought about that terrible morning when she'd woken up believing she was about to marry Ryan. If he hadn't betrayed her, if Sarah hadn't called Marcus, if she hadn't been brave enough to say yes to an impossible proposal, she never would have discovered that her greatest heartbreak had been preparing her for her greatest love. Sometimes the worst day of your life is actually the first day of the life you were always meant to live. Sometimes the person who leaves you at the altar isn't the tragedy, but the blessing that clears the path for your real happiness. And sometimes, just sometimes, love really does conquer all, especially when it gets a second chance to prove itself. Ryan was eventually arrested and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for embezzlement. Emma heard about it through mutual acquaintances and felt nothing but pity for a man who'd thrown away genuine love for easy money and selfish desires. She dodged a bullet she didn't even know was coming. As for the mysterious woman Ryan had left her for, Emma learned months later that she'd been a fellow criminal who'd helped him steal from his clients. They'd both disappeared the night before the wedding, only to be caught trying to cross the border into Mexico with stolen funds. Emma couldn't help but laugh at the justice of it all. Her mother, Patricia, had cried tears of joy watching Emma marry Marcus, admitting she'd never felt right about Ryan but hadn't wanted to interfere. Sarah took full credit for orchestrating the reunion, claiming she'd always known Marcus and Emma belonged together. Even the hotel staff said it was the most romantic wedding they'd ever hosted. Emma kept her original wedding dress in her closet, not as a reminder of heartbreak, but as proof that sometimes the most beautiful endings come from the most devastating beginnings. When people asked her about that incredible day, she always said the same thing: trust the process, even when the process feels like it's destroying you. Because sometimes, just sometimes, it's actually setting you free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.